Arthur Penhaligon woke up at 6:15 in the morning, just as he did every single day. The alarm clock didn't even need to buzz. His body was its own clock, wound tight by years of sameness. He would put on his gray suit, the one that felt like a uniform for a life he hadn't chosen. Downstairs, the coffee maker would have already brewed the coffee, a bitter smell that filled the silent house. His wife, Clara, would still be asleep. They didn't talk much in the mornings anymore. Their conversations had become like worn-out coins, smooth and meaningless from overuse. He would eat a piece of toast, standing by the kitchen counter, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured lawn he mowed every Saturday. His drive to work was the same path he had taken for 20 years. He worked as an accountant at a firm that valued order above all else. His desk was neat. His papers were filed. He was good at his job because it required no imagination, no sudden movements, just a steady hand and a mind for numbers that always added up to a predictable sum. He saw the same faces every day. They would nod and say, "Morning, Arthur," and he would nod back. He felt like a piece of furniture in the office, something useful and expected, but something no one ever really looked at closely. He was just there, a fixture in the background of other people's lives. The unhappiness wasn't a loud, screaming thing. It was a quiet hum, a low-level ache that sat deep in his chest. It was the feeling of being a passenger in his own car, watching the scenery pass by without ever touching the steering wheel. He looked at old photographs sometimes. He saw a younger man with a bright, hopeful smile, a man who wanted to travel and see mountains and oceans. That man had slowly disappeared, replaced by this gray, quiet person who measured his life in spreadsheets and mortgage payments. He felt trapped, not by walls, but by the comfortable, suffocating blanket of his own existence. He had everything a person was supposed to want, yet he felt nothing. He had tried to talk about it once, with Clara. He tried to explain the feeling of emptiness, the sense that he was fading away. She had looked at him with a confused expression, her brow furrowed. She told him he was just tired, that maybe he needed a vacation. They went to a beach resort for a week, but it felt like they had just moved their quiet, orderly life to a different location with more sand. The feeling didn't go away, it just got a tan. He realized then that the problem wasn't the place, the problem was him. He was the cage he was living in, and he was the only one who held the key. The moment of decision didn't come with a crash of thunder or a dramatic revelation. It happened on a Tuesday, a day no different from any other. He was sitting at his desk, staring at a column of figures that refused to balance. The numbers blurred, and for a second he couldn't remember what they even meant. He looked out the window at a bird sitting on a telephone wire, tilting its head at the sky. The bird seemed so completely free, so unburdened by accounts and expectations. In that tiny silent moment, something inside Arthur simply broke. It wasn't a loud crack, but a gentle, tired snap, like a rubber band that had been stretched too far for too long. He stood up from his chair. His colleagues didn't notice. He was a man who often got up to get a cup of coffee or use the restroom, a silent part of the office rhythm. But this time, he didn't turn toward the break room. He walked past his boss's office, past the rows of identical cubicles, and headed straight for the elevator. He didn't take his coat or his briefcase. He left his computer on, the screen still showing the stubborn, unbalanced spreadsheet. He felt a strange lightness as he pressed the button for the ground floor. It was as if he had been carrying a heavy backpack for years and had only just realized he could set it down. As the elevator doors slid open, he stepped out into the lobby. The security guard nodded at him, the same way he did every day. "Have a good one, Mr. Penhaligon," the guard said. Arthur just smiled a little, a real smile this time, not the tight, practiced one he usually wore. He walked out the revolving doors and into the bright afternoon sun. The city noise, usually just a dull background roar, sounded different. It sounded alive, full of possibilities. He didn't look back at the tall glass building he had just left. He simply started walking with no destination in mind, just away. He walked for hours, letting his feet carry him through unfamiliar neighborhoods. He felt a tremor of fear, a cold knot of worry in his stomach. What was he doing? He had no plan, no money beyond the cash in his wallet, no idea where he would sleep. He was abandoning his wife, his home, his entire life. The thought was terrifying, a giant wave of panic that threatened to pull him under. But beneath the fear, there was something else, a flicker of exhilaration. For the first time in decades, he didn't know what would happen next. And that uncertainty, which once would have paralyzed him, now felt like the purest form of freedom. Leaving his job had been simple. Leaving his home was harder. He waited until it was dark, until he knew Clara would be at her weekly book club meeting. He let himself into the house he had lived in for 15 years. It felt strange, like he was a burglar breaking into someone else's life. Every object seemed to hold a memory, a piece of the man he used to be. The armchair where he read the paper, the photograph of him and Clara on their wedding day, the faint scent of her perfume in the air. He was a ghost, haunting the halls of his own past, invisible and disconnected from it all. He didn't pack a large bag. He took only a few essential things, a change of clothes, his toothbrush, and a small, worn-out book of poetry he had loved in college. He paused in the kitchen, his hand hovering over the notepad on the counter. What could he possibly write? How could he explain a feeling that he barely understood himself? He decided against it. A note would be an anchor, a tie back to this world. He needed a clean break. Leaving without a word felt cruel, he knew, but it also felt necessary. It was the only way to make sure he wouldn't be tempted to turn back. As he walked out the front door for the last time, he didn't lock it. The simple act of turning the key felt too final, too deliberate. He just pulled it closed, hearing the soft click of the latch. He walked down the driveway, his footsteps loud in the suburban silence. He could feel the weight of every window on the street, imagining his neighbors peering out from behind their curtains. He felt their judgment, their confusion. But he kept walking, his gaze fixed on the end of the street, where the main road promised a way out, a path leading to somewhere new and unknown. He went to the bus station, a place filled with people in transit, all moving from one point to another. He bought a one-way ticket to a city he had only ever seen on a map, a place with a name that sounded like a new beginning. As he sat on the hard plastic seat waiting for the bus to depart, a profound sense of loneliness washed over him. He was completely and utterly alone. He had severed every tie. The fear came back, colder and sharper this time, but mixed with it was a quiet hope, a fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, he was walking toward a life that was truly his own. The first few weeks were a blur of cheap motels and bus station diners. Arthur learned that freedom was not always comfortable. It was often lonely and difficult. There were moments of deep regret, nights when he lay awake staring at a water-stained ceiling, wondering if he had made the most terrible mistake of his life. He missed the simple comforts of his old world, the familiar weight of his own blanket, the predictable taste of his morning coffee. He had shed his old skin, but the new one felt raw and exposed. He was no longer Arthur Penhaligon, the accountant. He was just a man with no history and no future. Slowly, however, things began to change. He started to notice the world around him in a way he never had before. He saw the color of the sky at dawn, listened to the conversations of strangers in a small-town cafe, and felt the simple joy of walking through a park without having to be anywhere. He had spent his life looking at spreadsheets, but now he was learning to read the faces of people. He took a job washing dishes in a small restaurant. The hot water and steam a welcome, mindless task. It was hard work, but it was honest. At the end of the day, his muscles ached, but his mind was quiet. He learned that happiness wasn't a destination you arrived at, but a way of traveling. It wasn't about having the perfect life, but about being present in the one you had. He learned to live with less, and in doing so, he found he had more. He discovered a resilience he never knew he possessed. He could handle uncertainty. He could be alone without being lonely. The quiet, gray man who had left his life behind was slowly being replaced by someone else, someone calmer and more open, someone who could smile at a stranger and mean it. Did he feel free? Yes, but not in the wild, reckless way he had imagined. It was a quieter, more profound freedom. It was the freedom to be himself, without the weight of expectations. He didn't know where his journey would end, or if it ever would. Some days a pang of sadness for the life he left would surface, a gentle ache for the woman he had abandoned. He didn't regret his choice, but he regretted the hurt he had caused. He had walked away to find himself, and in the process, he learned that the most important journey is the one that takes place inside your own heart.